So once Unreal is open here, we've now got an empty world. Not entirely empty. You can actually see that there's some stuff here floating around in this new world. I've got a little dialogue that popped open that said there's some new plugins available. I'm just going to dismiss this. I'm not going to worry about plugins for what I'm doing. Over in the outliner, we have a list of everything that was generated within this world here. There's a few things I could delete if I really wanted to. I'm just going to leave them as is for now. I think just the player start I'll get rid of. Now I can hit play, and we can play in the editor and see what this does. And I essentially just get a little WASD that I can move around. I'm not actually a person, right? I can actually move away from the floor, and I can fly as well. And so that's kind of cool. I'm going to hit escape to pop back out of that, and I'm back into the engine. That list that I created of things that we need to do, number 1 is now done off the list. I've now created the project. I'm going to go and hit save all, and I'll let it go and save whatever I've built. It's going to ask me to name my level. And so I'm going to call it weapon menu. Weapon menu. We'll call it that. I'm going to open up the Explorer so I can also see where I am here. So I'm in my content folder, and I now have a map here called weapon menu. This is probably not where I want to put this. I actually want to be a little bit more organized here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some folders. The first folder I'm going to create is going to be called maps. And I'm going to throw the map and the build data into that folder. I'm going to make sure that they get moved. Okay. Now I want to create some folders here in order to store the content that I've already created that we're going to need for this project. Now, how you store and organize your content is completely up to you. Again, I'm never going to see this. I'm never going to be inside of your editor. I'm never going to see how you put things together. So if you just want to have one big old messy folder and you put everything in there, have at it. I'll never see that. I like to stay pretty organized in the way that I work and I like to keep things, and this is kind of how I work within my folders when I'm creating content as well, is that I like to store things by type. So for instance, I'm going to create another folder here. I'm just going to right click, new folder, and I'll call this meshes. This is going to be all of the meshes that I use. Now, when I'm actually working on a game project, I'll split this up even further with static meshes and skeletal meshes. But here in our world, I'm just going to use one folder called meshes. I'll create another folder. And the other thing that we created as part of our content were textures. So I'm going to create a textures folder, and we'll be able to go and import our textures into there. If you remember, the other thing that we need to do here, as well as importing our assets, is going to be creating some materials. And I can go and create a materials folder as well. Oh, that's a new material called materials. That's not what I wanted. Let's delete that guy. Let's create a folder called materials. And there we have our folder. So this is going to help me stay a little bit more organized so that I know if I'm looking for a texture, I know where it's going to be. It's going to be in my texture folder. I know if I'm looking for, what happened? My screen share turned off. There we go. Don't know how that happened. So now that I've got this set up here, I've got my folder. So I know if I'm looking for a texture, where it's going to be. I know if I'm looking for a material, where it's going to be. And I know if I'm looking for a mesh, where it's going to be. It makes it a little bit easier to go and find my content. Before I bring my weapon into the content here, I'm going to go take a look at it. And I'm going to go, let's delete the stuff that I've done to it from previous. And the first thing that I'm going to need to do here is I need to get my asset into the engine. Now, we did export it as an FBX in order to be able to go and texture it inside of Painter. What the heck just happened? You guys see my screen okay? Looks like it just no, it completely crapped out again. Try that again. I'm not sure what's going on. The screen share keeps crapping out on me. So I have my asset here. what we have is the content that was created for Painter, right? We have all of these underscore low files here. In order to bring this into the engine and in order for our system to work, I'm going to create a couple of things. Now, you can do this in the engine as well, but I do find it a lot easier and better to do it inside of Maya because it'll give us a little bit more control over what we're doing. What that is I'm into the rigging shelf up here, and I'm going to go and create some joints. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create essentially a joint for the attachment points on our model. So I have my pistol here. And I'm going to go and click, create a joint, and then I'm going to go and move said joint up until the right place where I want to keep it on the mesh. So something a little bit like that. So this is right at the very front of my barrel, and I've gone and just lined it up with the absolute center line of my barrel. And I've lined it up at the very front of the barrel here. This is just a tiny little bone here that sits in the front of this. Now, we can actually use this for a couple of different things. We can use it as a spawn location for muzzle flash when the weapon fires. And we can also use it as an attachment point for anything that we might want to attach to the barrel. In our case, that's many things. Now, I'm going to go and rotate it so that Y is pointing forward. So I'm going to go to rotate. I'm going to double click on my rotate tool, and I'm going to make sure that snapping is turned on. Actually, we'll just hold J. I'll rotate this 90 degrees. And if I go to move again here, and I'm going to double click and get out of world and go to object, what I want to ensure is that I'm Y forward. This is going to ensure that the attachments will actually connect in the right way. So there's one. Let's go and give this guy a name. I'm going to call it socket underscore muzzle. And cool. I now have an attachment point for this thing. The next thing I'm going to do is go and create another one. I'm going to go into my side view here again. I'll go into my create joint tool again, and I'm just going to click up and above my rail, and I will go and place this here as well. So I'm going to put it on the very final, the very rear portion of my rail, and I'm going to place it there. Now, one of the reasons that I'm doing this is that the design of my attachments, my scopes, is that they all kind of sit back here on the weapon. So that means that I can actually put my pivot point for my scope at the rear of the scope and at the rear of the rail, and those two things will line up. If I put the attachment point at the front of the rail, I'll have to offset the scope backwards to get it where I want it. So it makes more sense to use the rear. Now, if I did have something that I wanted to go and put here, I would then have to put the offset on. But since most of what's going to go on the top rail is scopes, I'm going to go put them back here so that they end up exactly where I want them to go. This guy, we're going to go give a name to as well. Socket underscore, and I'll call this top. I do have a few rails that I'm going to create here. I have 3 on my weapon, so there's the first one. We can go and create that. I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate it, and we'll create another one. I'll go throw this one underneath the weapon. And we'll just go and, again, I'm going to place it on the very rear Picatinny rail. Actually, I've got this in the wrong place. I should be right in the middle of the Picatinny rail. So that one and this one, we're going to go put this in the right place. I don't want it on the top of the rail. That's not where this goes. The inside of the rail, this lines up with where I've got my attachment. So one there, one there. We're going to go call this one socket underscore bottom. BOTTOM. And then I've actually got one more that I want to do. And you can see this here is on the side. So let me just show you again with the top one why I'm seating it in the middle of the rail is I'm putting it where that angle sits. And that means that I can define that on both the attachments and on my weapon quite easily. So again, I'm going to hit Control D. It's going to duplicate my attachment again. And I'm going to go move this one over here. And we will line it up with this rail as well. I just kind of use the move tool here a little bit until my edges kind of black out on me. That means they're in the right place. Or something like that. And then again, this one needs to sit inside of the rear rail, which is this little gap back here. Now this one too, I want to orient it so that it's pointing the right way. In fact, all of them need to be pointed the right way. So I believe what I need to do here, and we'll double check this in a moment, is I need to spit Y forward and Z up. And so that one's in the right place. If I go to the top one, I can see that this one is wrong as well. So I'm going to hold J. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. Like so. So it should be Y forward, Z up. I've got the one on the bottom, which should be as well Y forward. Oops, not like that. Like this. Y forward. Now this one I don't actually want to be Z up. And the reason I don't want Z up is that if I put a scope here, the scope's going to be inside the gun. So I'm going to rotate this one. Undo. Hold J. 180, like so, so that it points down in Z. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm using the Z axis to point in the direction where the attachment is going to be. So for this guy, the Y points forward. That's where the attachment's going to come out. And then for the other ones, top, Y is forward, and Z points where the attachment's going to go. The bottom, Y is forward, Z shows me where the attachment is going to go. And then on the side, which I should name side, I'm going to do the same thing here. I need Y forward, so I'm going to go to rotate. I'm going to hold J and rotate this 90 degrees. Again, I'm going to check my move axis here, and again, I'm using object mode in order to be able to see this local direction. And again, my Z is pointing up, which is not where I want the attachment to go. I want the attachment to go sideways here. I'm also going to rotate 90 degrees this way. And that should give me my attachment sticking out on the side. Now, since we've got some bones here, we're going to actually go and make this a skeletal mesh. So I'm going to go and select all of these components, and I'm going to middle mouse drag them onto the body. And what this is going to do is it's going to parent them to the body. So if I grab the body of the gun and I move it, the whole gun moves. And that's exactly what I want to have happen. I now have everything all combined into a single usable piece. So we're going to select all of this. Try that again. There we go. And I'm going to say File, Export Selection, FBX, Export Selection. Now this, unlike your other exports, needs to actually be an FBX. If you don't export this as an FBX, your bones won't get incorporated. So this is one of the big differences here between OBJ and FBX. FBX can contain bones and it can contain rigging. OBJs cannot. They're just going to contain the geometry. So those of you that had an error when you were doing your texturing, you'll need to convert to an FBX in order to move forward. Substance Painter, if you go into the File menu, will allow you to export your mesh as an FBX from there. Bring that FBX into Maya, throw on your bones, and you should be good to go. So let's go back into Unreal, and let's see if this sucker is going to work. So I'm in my mesh category here. I'm going to go to Add Import. I'm going to go to Import, and I'm going to go and choose something to bring in. So Projects, there's my TT33 and FBX, and here is my weapon with its proper naming. Last name, .weapon name, .fbx. So I'm going to bring this in. And we're going to need to set up some settings here when we bring this in to make sure that Unreal is treating our asset the way that it should be. This is a skeletal mesh. So I'm going to tell it to be a skeletal mesh. It has bones in it. I'm also going to use the drop down here and tell it not to worry about skinning weights, just bring the geo in. I'm not going to tell it a skeleton. Our asset has a skeleton, and there aren't actually any skeletons in Unreal. So by leaving this blank, Unreal will generate its own skeleton. I'll use the arrow to drop down the next section. Vertex colors I don't care about. The next thing I'm caring about is the normal input method. So right now it's on compute normals, and I don't want it to actually change the normals. So I'm going to import my own normals. The next thing that I want to do has to do with textures and materials. So I'm going to scroll down, and here are my materials. Don't bring my materials in. Don't create materials. Don't import textures. I got it. Okay, I can do that myself. In fact, it's just going to import them into my meshes folder where I don't want them anyway. So with that said, I'm going to hit import, and we should get a warning here when this happens that it couldn't find the bind pose of my mesh. That's fine. It's not a character and there isn't actually any binding, so I don't care that it can't find a bind pose. So we can close that. It also generated a physics asset, which I can delete. In the settings, you can actually tell it not to do that, which would have been smarter to do, but I forgot about it. The other thing that I want to do here is I want to double check that my asset came in correctly. So I'm inside of the asset viewer. You reach this by just double clicking on your asset. It's the one with the picture of your asset. The other one is the skeleton, which we'll go take a look at in a moment. So here's my asset, and on the left, I can see that there are two material slots. One called Mat 1 and one called Mat 2. This is exactly how I textured this asset. And so everything here is exactly how I expect it to look. In the tabs here, we can bounce over to the skeleton. And what we should see in the skeleton here is all of our components. And then if you remember, I added those sockets. And here they are here. Socket muzzle, socket top, socket bottom, and socket side. If I go and hit W here to go to my move tool, we should see these things pointing negative Y here in the engine. So if I go to muzzle, negative Y is forward and Z is up. Top, negative Y is forward, Z is up. Bottom, negative Y is forward, Z is down. So it did take in our values here. And then negative Y is back, and this is the side. Yeah, negative, that's back, and Z is out to the side. So it looks like our bones are going to work. We're going to actually have to check this a little bit more correctly again once we get our systems in. So this is a good start. We know that the mesh now does what we expected it to. So now I'm going to go into my textures, and we can begin the process of importing textures. So I'm going to go and import. I just right click this time to do it. I'm going to switch from the FBX folder to the textures folder. And here I can go grab, you can see I've got a lot more textures than what we actually need. There are actually just 6 textures that I need for this thing. They're all named accordingly, almost. It looks like there was a little bit of a hiccup with the naming here that I'm going to correct. The second texture from Mat 2 called it _2 _1 _3. And that's not the way that this should be named. So I'm going to go and replace these. And just swapping out that 2, that 3, and that 1 for a 2. So there are my textures. Now, a normal map, and this is kind of important here, it was imported and Unreal detected that it was a normal map, and it set the compression on this item to be that of a normal map, which is good. That's what we want. Now, for those of you that don't know, a normal map is not just a collection of pretty colors with this kind of purpley tinge to it. This is actually a byproduct of what a normal map is, or how a normal map works. See, a normal map, if we go and take a look at our values here, the red channel has lighting in the horizontal direction, or not lighting, but it has directionality in the horizontal channel. So anything that points towards the right becomes white. Anything that points towards the left becomes black, with 50% gray pointing straight towards us. This gives us this kind of angle of directionality, so we can actually see what direction the surfaces are pointing. The green channel gives us the exact same thing, but vertically. We're now seeing that white color point down and the black color point up, with, again, 50% gray pointing directly towards us. So when you see something like my little text here embossed in the gun, we can tell that this is pushed in because the white is on top. If this was pushed out, the white would be on the bottom, right? Because white is down. Finally, the blue channel is pointing directly towards us. So white points towards us, and black is perpendicular to that angle. So any direction on the canvas. This gives us mostly white with a few gray areas here as things point away from the camera. Now, it is the combination of these 3 images that gives us that purple color. That's what a normal map is. It's kind of a byproduct of those directionalities. Because of this, because of the way that a normal map works, the engine compresses it in a very special way, which is turning off the sRGB. This allows the engine to compress each of these channels independently of one another, instead of combining them together and compressing a purple image. This gives you a far more accurate normal map once it's mapped or down-resed. And so that's what we want to make sure that we do when we compress things, we compress them the right way. Now, Unreal can do this on import for normal maps. It recognizes what a normal map is when you import it, and it'll automatically do this for you. It does not, however, recognize an ARM map, and it will not do this setting for an ARM map, even though the ARM map is the same thing. It is 3 images, each occupying a different channel of a color image. This time resulting in this kind of funny pink and purple image here. So what you need to do on import is turn off the sRGB on your ARM maps. And when you do that, they will then display correctly. If you don't do this, it's not going to look exactly the way it did in Painter. You're going to have a little bit of a discontinuity between the render in Painter and the render here in the engine. So beautiful. I now have my textures in place. Now that I've imported everything, I'm going to hit Save All. We'll save all these files that we've imported. And now I'm going to jump into materials and we can start creating some materials. To create a material, I'm just going to right click, go to the material and say yes. I'm going to name this now. I'm going to call it MA for master material. I'm going to put an underscore and I'm going to call it weapons. Now I've got my TT33 in here that I've brought in. I don't want to call this TT33. I'm going to call this weapons because this base material is going to get applied to all of my weapons. The materials need to compile at runtime, and that can take a little bit of time. So the more materials you have, the slower your system is going to be here when you play this game. So to speed things up, I'm going to limit the number of master materials I make, the ones that need to compile, and I'm going to instead create some instances. I'm going to right click and create a material instance. And here I'll call this MI, material instance, underscore TT33 mat1. And now I've got an instance of this material that doesn't need to compile. That is going to speed up the system quite a bit. This means that for all of the weapons that I create, provided they are going to render the same way and have the same features, I can actually just keep instancing this thing. So let's go into this material. I'm going to go and dock it into the engine here. And we have our output here. I'm going to go in and grab my textures. So this is going to be mat 1. So I'm just going to grab mat 1, mat 1, mat 1. So every other image here. And I'm going to go and just drag those into the editor and let them go. I'm going to set this material up here kind of as I need it. So first, I'll plug in my base color and my normal map. And then we'll go and plug in the ARM. So this guy here, A, or the red channel, is the ambient occlusion. R, or the green channel, is the roughness. And M, or the blue channel, is our metallic value. Now, if I were to save this, we should actually see our material rendering the right way. Let's go into the meshes, choose our weapon, go to asset details, and we can now actually assign this material to the pistol. So here is my material 1 in the drop-down list. I'm going to type in mi underscore TT, and that'll show up my material. This will, after a second, as it kind of configures itself here, show us onto the weapon what this material looks like. And that's pretty much exactly the way it looked like in Painter, which is a good thing. Now, in order to create the next material, right, I need to create a mat 2. So we create another material instance. This is mi material instance underscore TT33 mat 2. This one I'm going to apply to the other category. So TT should give me mat 2. And you'll see that it's the wrong textures. It's still using the textures from mat 1. So we need to go and find the right textures. Now the problem with this is that if I open up material 2, or the instance of the material here, you notice that we don't have the ability to manipulate any textures. That's because they aren't parameters. They're hard-coded into that material. So we're going to convert them into parameters. I'm just going to move this guy down here. I'll start with our base color. I'm going to right-click, convert to parameter, and I'll call it base color. Now, if you watch what happens when I save the material to our instance, as soon as it's saved, we now have an input for base color. That means that we can now swap out this image. So we need only do this for each of these parameters, ARM, convert to parameter, and normal, save our material again, and we will now have the ability to input custom maps into these 4 or 3 channels. So if I return back to the texture section, I can now grab ARM2, base color 2, and normal map 2, and save those. Now if we go look at the weapon, again, it has updated and is showing us all of the proper textures. So beautiful. That's exactly the way that I want that to work. I'm going to close the instance for now, and we'll go back into our material. Now there's another element of the weapon that we need to do. We need 5 custom paint jobs on the weapon. Currently, there's nothing here that's going to do that. If we go and look at our mask material, you'll see that in my alpha channel is where I've stored my paint job, right? So I saved it out from Painter and then went and just pasted it directly into here. And this is just meant to look like kind of old spray paint on here. So we can use that to apply paint to the weapon. The way that we're going to do that is by using a node called a linear interpolate. So if you right click and do a search for linear, it'll be right here into the math section, linear interpolation. You can also just hold L and click to create a lerp. So here's our linear interpolate. And what linear interpolate is going to do is it's going to allow us to choose an input A, an input B, and then an alpha, which is going to determine how much of each of these things is present. So it kind of interpolates between the 2 values. I'm going to use our color as value A, and we can go and replace this as the base color. Now you can see that this is going to add a really bizarre effect to our material, and that's because I'm blending this with 1, which is white, and I'm blending it at a value of 0.5, so it's doing 50% of my color and 50% of white. That's not actually what I want. I want to put a paint job in here. So I'm going to go to my textures. I'm going to go and import, and I'm going to go grab a couple of camo images that I've got here. So there's a forest camo and an urban camo, and I can go pull these in. I'll use the urban camo, and I'll drag it into my material and place it below the base color. Now, since I know I'm going to want to make changes to this, I'm going to go and convert it to a parameter right away and call it paint pattern. And I can plug it into B. So now we're going to see 50% of our paint pattern and 50% of our color pattern, which again is not what we want. So I'm going to use the alpha channel from the ARM, and I'm just going to duplicate my ARM input. That's Control W that does that. And I'm going to use the alpha from it here. This is an instance of the same node. And now it's putting the paint where the paint belongs. This is because my mask is black and white, and it's using black to show me the base color and white to show me where the paint is, giving me something that looks pretty decent. In fact, if we save this and go back to the pistol, we'll see that this is doing a pretty good job. Now, this is one of the really beautiful things about instancing, is that I only manipulated the master material, but you can see it had an effect on both of the instances. I don't like the scale of this. See how big my grid is on here? I don't like this. This is a digital camo, and I want to be able to see that pixelization a lot better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and create a texture coordinate node, and I'm going to plug that into the UVs of the paint job node, and I'm just going to tile this 3 times. That should give me something a little bit closer to what I'm looking for. So I'll save this again and go back, and indeed now I can actually see that digital camo a little bit more clearly. I say a little clearly because it's black and white on a black and white pistol here, but it is working. Now, the nice thing about this is that, again, if we go into our material instances, say this one, I now have not only my ARM base color in normal, but I now have the paint pattern, which means if I were to go and select my green one, I can go and hit the little arrow here to assign that, and now we get our jungle or forest pattern on here. This is going to work with any tiling image that you bring in. So if you want to give your users the ability to put all kinds of really cool patterns on here, you only need to make some tiling patterns and you can bring them in. So there is what that jungle camo will look like. And again, it's only on the one component here, not on the other. Now, when we set up this system, we're going to make sure that it applies the same camo pattern to both. Now, there's another problem with the camo, which is it's not actually looking like paint. Where there's metal on the gun, the paint is turning into metal. And where it's not metal, the paint is not metallic. And that's because in here, the only thing that we're swapping is just our color. We need to swap everything else too. So here's my ARM. I'm going to create a couple more lerps, one for roughness, one for metallic. Now these ones, I don't actually need a B value here. The metallic value of paint is going to be not metallic, 0. So I'm going to leave that like that. So A is my blue channel, my metallic map. The alpha is my alpha channel, and this is now my metallic. This is going to make sure that the paint remains non-metallic wherever it appears. The other one I want to do is the roughness. So this is the roughness of my pistol. I can now go pick the roughness of the paint, which I'm going to make it 0.2, I think. And then again, I will use the alpha channel, which is our paint mask, into the alpha. This can now replace our roughness input. And now these two lerps are going to take care of those two inputs. So again, if I were to save this and go back and look at our pistol, the paint should actually be appearing to be a little bit glossy now, and it shouldn't be becoming metallic wherever the gun is metal. Beautiful. I'm pleased with that. I'm going to go set my digital camo back, just so that the pistol looks uniform. And now we can go and add a little bit more functionality. So what I've done right now is I've added the paint. But there isn't any kind of system in place for what happens when the user doesn't want a painted pistol, or when they have the ability to change the paint. So we're going to go and build that. Now, just like when these were converted to parameters, convert to parameters so that we could see it in the instance, we're going to create another kind of parameter so it can be manipulated in the instance. This parameter is called a static switch parameter. And it essentially is a Boolean, true or false. Now, I always name my Booleans as questions. That way it becomes very evident and clear what the inputs should be. So this one, we're going to call has paint question mark. So, obviously, as paint question mark, if the answer is true, it should have paint. So, this I know is my output to becoming painted. If it doesn't have paint, well, that's just our base color. So, I can wire that in there. Then, I can go and put this into the base color, and as soon as I hit save, our pistol will then be without paint. We now have a bool on our weapon that turns the paint on and off. That is essentially that system built. We don't have any inputs or any UI or anything to do this during game, but it's set up to do so. So that's all I really need to do. Cool. I can close that. I also need to do the same thing with these two. Again, has paint should also affect the roughness and metallic values of the paint. This is easy. I'm going to select my has paint static switch, and I'm going to hit Control W to make a couple copies of it. True, again, is what happens when there is paint. So these guys become true, and the outputs will replace the metallic and roughness. Then we just need a false value. The false value is what happens when we don't use paint, meaning just our direct outputs from this node. Now we can also just grab another instance of this to try and keep this a little bit cleaner. And we can use our metallic is blue and roughness is green from this node. If I hit apply again, since these are instances of the same switch, when we go into our material instances, there will only be one question switch. Has paint, true or false? And when I turn it on, it will go and affect the paint and put it on. When I turn it off, it goes away. So, super useful to get that going. Now, what happens in the case of not wanting to have camouflage as your paint job? What if your user just wants the gun to be painted purple or blue or anything, any color? Well, here's our paint color. Right now, our paint color is coming from a pattern. And we now know that a static switch has the ability of choosing between two different options. So I'm going to instance the switch. This time, instead of has paint, we're going to go rename this. This is going to make it a new static switch. I'm going to call this paint as pattern, question mark. You'll notice the other ones didn't switch. Only this one did. If the paint has a pattern, let's use our pattern. And I'll replace the B. Next, what happens if our paint doesn't have a pattern? Well, I'm going to create a vector parameter. This is going to be an RGBA value that we can choose to change at runtime. I'm going to call this paint color. And I'll drag its RGB value into false. Now, we'll give this a default value of something other than black, since the weapon is mostly black to begin with, or very dark gray. We want to make sure that we can see all of this. So I can hit save, and we can go back to our pistol, and look at that. We've now got a red paint job on the pistol. If I open up the material instance for that particular portion of the pistol, you can see that we have paint as pattern, which I can turn on, and it'll switch to the camo. And if I turn it off, it goes back to the paint job, or the flat colored paint. Also, when it has the flat colored paint, we also now get a color picker, which gives us the ability to choose and change the color of our paint, giving us some really cool, unique abilities here to customize what this thing looks like. So cool, that's kind of turning out really, really awesome. Again, the system isn't built in order to interact with these things during gameplay, but the features are here and that are going to make it work. Now, since I don't actually need to do any of the paint pattern versus paint flat to our roughness or our metallic values, those things are actually kind of good to go. And now, the entirety of this material is properly set up. So, I'm going to now close this material. I'll go and reset this one to not have paint so that it goes back and I can see just my regular plain old pistol here. And things are looking pretty honky-dory. Next, we can go and bring in another asset. Meshes. Add import. Import. And this is where things are going to speed up a little bit. So I'm going to go and I'm going to switch folders here and go into my Colt folder, which is where some of my attachments are. And I'm going to go and grab, let's do the laser. I'll import this. Now this is a attachment, so I don't want this one to be skeletal. So I'm going to turn off that option. I'm going to make sure that it is combining meshes. Otherwise, each of my underscore loads are going to come in as separate attachments. I want to make sure I'm importing my normals. And I want to make sure that it does not create materials and does not import textures. Now, I can hit import. Here is my tiny little laser. I'm going to turn off the grid. Next, I'm going to go into my textures. I'm going to go to add import, and I'm going to import. And now we can go and find the textures for the laser. Projects. I think they're in TT33 textures. They are not. They are in the Colt textures. And here they are here. So laser, laser, laser. ARM, base color, normal. Import. I, again, immediately am going to go and turn off the sRGB for the ARM. Next, materials. Now, my attachments are not going to get painted. Only the weapon is. I don't actually want to paint any of my attachments. This means that I need a new material, since my master material contains paint, and the instances are duplicates of the master. So, I'm going to create a new material, a new master, MA underscore attachment. And now I have a material that will serve for the attachments. This is going to be a much simpler attachment or material that's going to contain only 3 textures. This is going to contain my ambient occlusion, roughness, and metallic values. It's going to contain my base color and my normals. And all of these also need to be parameters because I will have more than one attachment. So I'll right click, convert to parameter. We'll call this base color. We'll call the normal normal. So convert to parameter, normal. And we'll call the ARM, convert to parameter, and ARM. Again, I will compile and save this material. And I can now minimize that. In my material section, I will take my attachments, instance it, MI for material instance, underscore laser. On the laser, we can go and look for laser. And there's my MI laser. And cool, I got my little laser attachment now ready to go. That guy's done. I don't have to do anything else to my attachments in that regard. Now, once you do have things like that, things like your materials ready to go, watch how fast it is to go. So I'm going to go and do another attachment now. Add import. Import my mesh. This attachment is going to be the suppressor. So we'll go to FBX. I'll go to suppressor. We'll spell suppressor correctly. We'll import the suppressor. This is also not going to be skeletal, and it will have remembered all of my settings from before. There's my suppressor. Under materials, I will make an instance of my material, call it a material instance, and call it suppressor. Under textures, we'll go to add, import. We'll go to our texture folder. We'll grab our suppressor textures. We'll turn off the sRGB on the arm. And then we'll open up the material instance for editing. Suppressor. Pull this down a little bit. We'll turn on the maps. We'll go to our textures, and we can plug in the suppressor textures. If I go to my meshes, and I go to the suppressor, I can now go and do a drop down, do a search for suppressor, and now we'll go zoom in to make sure it looks okay. And indeed, I've got my suppressor working the way that I want it to work. I can close this. That's it. That's all that's involved in doing these things. Now, I do have one type of attachment in which this is going to break a little bit. Let me show you that. I'm going to add import, and I will go and choose, for my FBX, I have a scope. Now, I'm going to rename this because I want to be a little bit more accurate. Seymour scope. This is a red dot scope made by a company called Seymour. I'll leave my settings again. This is going to tell me that it had a material name clash, and it has an issue here with something called caulking tube. That's because it's a material that was actually on another weapon. As a result, this ended up with 3 materials. That's actually only supposed to have 2. If I use highlight, it can show me where the materials are. The bottom one, which is called lens, without the E, is just the lens. The middle one, called Seymour scope, is actually the majority of the scope. And then there's one called Seymour, and it's actually just the screws that go through the bottom. That shouldn't have been the case. They all should have been on that same material ID. I'm just going to apply the material ID to this. This is a bad thing, and I would want to correct this. This is going to add an additional draw call to this asset that it doesn't need. It's the same material. I'll leave it like that for now. Let's go and import our textures. Add import. These ones aren't in my Colt folder, but they're in my MP5K folder. I'm going to go to my textures, and I've got a folder called complete. And here I'm going to import my normal, base color, and ARM maps. You can see that I've got a different naming convention here, which I'm going to need to correct. I've also got a little dot. I'm not going to import that, though. Again, once imported, I'm going to go and turn off the sRGB on the ARM. This requires a new material because I'm going to be using transparency. So I need to create a new material. This is going to be MA_lens. The lens material is required for anything with transparency. The first step in my material is to go to the blend mode and change it to be translucent. This is going to make sure that the object renders is slightly transparent. Next, in the translucency section, I'm going to switch the lighting mode to surface translucency volume. This is going to make sure that I still get the use of my metallic and roughness nodes. I'll dock this. I'll grab my textures, 1, 2, 3, and we'll drag those into the lens material. We'll go and I'll arrange them the right way. So first is our base color. Next is our normal. And then finally our ambient occlusion, roughness, and metal. Ambient occlusion, roughness, and metallic. I'm going to switch this over to a plane so we can better see what's going on. And once it finishes compiling here, we should see it appear as this bluish, greenish, shiny-ish circle. That doesn't look very much like glass at the moment, and that's because there actually is no opacity. I'm going to use the blue channel from my model here, from my base color, and I'm going to plug that into the opacity. That should give me a mostly opaque little guy. That's okay. I'm not really liking that. Let's try the green channel. I know one of these things works really well. And I don't like that either. Let's try the green channel from the ARM. This is our roughness map. That works a little bit better. So I can see the dirt present, and I can see that the glass now is transparent. I'm going to add a linear interpolation for my refraction. I'll use the same green, I'll use the blue channel for the alpha. And I'm just going to lerp between two values close to 1, so 0.9 and 1.1. So just a very slight change in that value. So plus or minus 0.1. And this is just going to give me a little bit. You can see that it's warping just a little bit at the perimeter. So that's cool. That makes it read a little bit more like glass. So this is almost good. The one last thing that I need to do is that this is supposed to be a laser sight. I want to be able to put the laser here. So I'm going to start off by creating, I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a radial gradient. Like this. So what the radial gradient does is it just creates, I'm going to preview this so you can see it. Right click, start preview, just creates a circle. Now if I go plug some values into these guys, I can play around with what that circle does. So I'm going to grab S and click, that's a scalar parameter, and I'll call this radius, and I'll set this to something like 2.5, and we'll plug that into the radius. 2.5 is too big. I think I meant 0.25. There we go. That's probably still, again, when looking at the size of my scope, that's a big old laser dot, so that's not going to work. Let's try and shrink that down even further, 0.025. Now we're talking. So now I get a nice little clean dot. Next, we're going to multiply this by a vector. This is going to give us the ability to change the laser color. I'll plug this into the multiply and we'll start previewing the multiply. Multiplying it by 0 results in 0, so that's not good. Let's start by giving it a value of 1. So that we are actually getting a red dot. Then I'm going to multiply this again, so I'm going to pull out and multiply. This time, I'm going to multiply against a scalar, and I'll call this brightness, and I'll plug this into the multiply. Now, if I go and preview this one, the brightness, we'll give it a default value of, let's start with 250. And look at that. We get the impression of this being a little hot laser dot, even with a little bit of glow around the perimeter. Now, we just need to add this to the rest of our material. I'm going to stop previewing this, and I'm going to throw this into the emissive color, the glow. This is going to add it to the glass right in the center, like so, which is okay. I'm also going to add it to the base color. So we're going to pull this out, hit add, and we'll add it to our base color node. This is going to make sure that it's not glowing transparent here. I may also, because I don't want the dot to be translucent, I may also take my opacity, which is the blue channel, add to it our gradient. And I'll put that into the opacity. This means that the laser won't actually be translucent. It'll actually be opaque. I'll hit save, and that's it. This material should be good to go. Now I can actually use this on all of my scopes. Anything that's going to have glass, anything that's going to have that kind of a lens, that should work. So if I go to meshes, there's my Seymour. We'll go and zoom in on it. Let's go see what this is going to look like. So here's my lens here. We need to specify this material. I'm going to go materials. I'm going to create an instance of the lens, which I'll call material instance underscore Seymour lens. And then in the Seymour, we can call Seymour lens. And there, we're now getting, cool, little laser lens. The next thing I want to do is build the material for the Seymour, which is just an attachment. So create an instance, material instance underscore Seymour. In here, I'll undock that. I'll go to my textures. We'll turn on the ARM, base color, normal, and then we'll grab, doesn't look like I imported the Seymour textures. So let's go and import them. Bizarre. I thought I imported them. I guess not. Where's the Seymour? Here it is. Here, here, and here. Again, Turn off the sRGB. And then going and applying these. That material is good to go, and we can now apply it here. See more. And see more. And there, I've got my little Seymour scope ready to go. And that's it. I just want to kind of apply these materials in a way here that I can actually go and see what these things are going to look like. And that's it. That is the preparation for this. I'm going to go and hit save all here because I've added a ton of stuff. And I'm going to do a little test fit here with my pieces to see how they fit. I'm going to go to content. I'm going to create a new folder, which I'm going to call blueprints. And in here, we'll just create a very quick blueprint actor. And we'll go see if we can make this stuff work. So first, I'm going to add a skeletal mesh. And if you remember, that's our pistol. So in the drop down, I'll choose my pistol. I'm also going to make it the default root. This way, I don't get that little white sphere interrupting or interfering with us. So now I've got this thing ready to go. That's one.
Oh, she came.
The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and add my attachments. So my attachments aren't skeletal, they're static. So under add, I'm going to write static. There's my static mesh, and I'll go and add this. And let's start with Seymour here. So I'm going to drop down C, M, and O. There's my Seymour, and there's my scope. Now you can see it's not going anywhere near where I want it to go. It's coming in and it's all backwards and goofy and stuff. So here's how this system's going to work. With my static mesh selected, I have something called a parent socket. And if I use the magnifying glass, it's going to search the static mesh for bones. And if I use socket top, it'll snap the scope up to the top socket. Now you can see that the pivot point is off on my scope. It's actually backwards. That's not the way that thing's supposed to line up. If I were to use a different one, socket bottom, it goes, flips upside down, and attaches to the bottom socket. If I say socket side, it goes sideways and jumps onto the side of the pistol. Again, you can see that the pivot point of the object is backwards. It's not allowing it to work the right way. This means it needs to be corrected. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to hide this guy. File and import. And we're going to go grab the Seymour and make it correct. So I'm going to go to Colt, FBX, Seymour scope, and import. I can see here the error in materials too. So this is something that I can actually correct. If I go to my polygons, I'm going to double click those red guys, right click and hold, assign existing material, and this was the Seymour scope. That's much better. Next, I'm going to turn on the grid, and I can see exactly what has happened here. This thing came in with the front lined up. So I'm just going to move it forward until the rear is lined up with the origin. I'll select the whole thing. I'm going to go back to my poly modeling here. We're going to reset its history. I'm going to say File, Export Selection, and we're going to overwrite the previous one. Colt, FBX, Seymour, Export Selection, and yes. And now, if I go and re-import that asset, back to my meshes, re-import, it actually should go on the right way. Let's go to here and say, oh, I didn't turn it around. Socket top. So it's now attaching at the right position, but I forgot to rotate it. We'll go back to Maya. I'm going to go rotate. And we're going to hit J, and we'll rotate it 180. And then we'll go move it so that the rear of it's in the right place. And again, I'm going to delete my history. I'll actually go to modify, and we'll freeze our transforms and delete history. And we'll export it again over the Seymour. Okay, so let's try it again. Let's see if this works. So if I go and re-import the Seymour, go back and look at that. Now it lines up with the pistol exactly where it should. Let's add another one. Let's see if this works. Add static mesh, and added another scope here. That's not what I want. I'm going to rename this. Actually, I'm going to leave them just as is. I'm not going to worry about that. We'll do that next week. Let's swap this out for laser. And let's choose where the laser goes. Let's put it on the side. And let's see if that worked. So it did not. It looks like the laser is actually embedded inside of the mesh. So I need to make sure that the laser was exported the right way. Again, I can grab this guy. I'm going to delete him. I don't need him in scene anymore. And I'll go and import my laser. Here's my laser. And I can see an issue right out of the gate. Something is sideways. I'm going to rotate this 180. Something has gone really remarkably wrong with this. Let's delete that. Go back to object here. File import. Laser. Why is it coming in? Let's grab all this. Modify. Reset transforms. That's not better. Not sure what's happening here. Maybe I'll try this in 3ds Max. Yeah, I'm gonna do this in Max. So I have the mistake here of keeping them separate, and I don't want them separate. So I'm just gonna I'll use Max to join them together. I don't know what's going on in Maya here. When I import them, it's screwing up their rotations. And as far as I know, Maya shouldn't actually be rotating anything on import. But that is essentially the entirety of this system here. Wrong one. We go in here. So if I were to go and, instead of the laser, if we were to use the suppressor here, and I were to tell the suppressor to go on the muzzle, you can see that that system is just going to work. And so you can see how really cool this is going to be once we get this set up here. In order to be able to go and bounce around and swap between those pieces, it'll be a really, really neat system. And that's the blueprint is how we're going to do this. We're gonna go up and set a script up here that is going to allow the user to go and manipulate those systems. So here's Max, file, import, and let's go projects and Colt and FBX. What is this? The laser. Import. Why is it screwed up here too? I am very, very confused by this. And all my smoothing is broken too. Okay. I'm not entirely sure what's happened with this thing. I might have to go and correct this. This is all going to be separate pieces too, isn't it? It looks like all my smoothing broke. That looks back to normal. That looks back to normal. And I'm going to need, I believe, to put my material on this in order to be able to see what I'm doing. I'm not sure what happened. I don't know why it's rotating like this. Let me go check my rotations. They all have the same rotations. Are you coming in rotated? And why did it not come in rotated in Unreal? Very strange. Okay, let's get out of here. I just need a bitmap. And we'll go and projects. Where are you? Lasers and Colt. Textures. There's the laser. So I just want to put this material on so that I can actually see when things line up. Because I don't remember. That's where the screws go. I need to be able to put the screws in the right place. So the screws go there. Like so. Yeah, I don't know what happened here. I don't know why this has gotten all screwy on me. Something broke. Oh. That's what happened. Let me undo that. Let me break them and see again. 0, 0, 0. That's what happened. They were parented, and for whatever reason that was screwing it up. So that will fix everything. Really, really bizarre. So I'm just going to I'm going to combine these things together here in Max. I'm just going to use attach, and we'll just attach everything. I'll reset my X form, and we'll export this again. Again, I'm going to make sure that where this thing attaches, again, the rear of the Picatinny here is in the right place. Make sure that it's in the front view. The Picatinny is right through the middle. And we'll export this. That should fix what's going on. So FBX, and we'll go back into that Colt folder. Desktop. Projects. Colt. FBX. So you're going to probably come across things like this that are going to happen to you here as you're messing around with your assets in order to get some orientations correct and things like that you might have to do. Now, the ones that have been handed in, I will 100% go through them to make sure that they do all line up the right way. So that when you get somebody else's asset and you bring it in, it just works. So I'm going to go add another static mesh here just to, again, test this out. And we'll put this on the side. And I will also re-import this. No, not double click. Right click, re-import. And then we'll go here. Well, that didn't go at all where it was supposed to go. Top. Side. Okay, so again, it needs to be hung upside down. So that was the original problem I was trying to fix. We're going to rotate it 180. Let's do this with snaps on. And again, I'll move it back up. The Picatinny's in the right place. Oh. Come back here, you. And something like that. So file, export, selected. And this will just get it to be in the right position so that everything just works automatically. And that's what we want. We want to make sure that we're not doing any unneeded rotation in the engine, any unneeded scaling in the engine, that everything just works the way it's supposed to work. So if I bring that back in, that should now line up the right way. So there we go. And so if I want this to be undermounted, I should be able to go in here and choose bottom, and it should just pop to the bottom and go in the right place on the rail. And so that's how we're going to set this up. That's how we're going to make sure that this whole system works exactly the way that we want it to work, is by putting these little nubs in the right places, these little bones in the right places here, and then being able to snap these attachments to it. So that's how that's going to work. I'm not going to bother saving this. I'm actually going to delete that blueprint. I just wanted to show you how it's going to get attached and make sure that my system's working. So what I'm going to do for you guys is come the end of my grading here, when I go through all of your assets and I go through them, I'm going to be putting together a Google Drive. I will be putting all of the assets in a Google Drive. They're not going to be sorted the way that I've got my content sorted here, where it's maps, where it's meshes and textures. I'm going to put them in the actual weapon name. So if there's let's say there's a Glock 17, I'm going to create a Glock 17 folder and I'll put the mesh and the textures in there. And what I'll do is I'll make a folder for assets and a folder for attachments, and I'll sort them like that. In the case that, and this seems to be pretty prevalent, I don't know what it was about the Glock 17, but everybody got really happy about a Glock 17, and it seems like we got a lot of Glock 17s here. So what's going to happen in the eventuality that there are duplicate versions of the same weapon, I will choose the one that looks the best, and that's the one that's going to go into the collection. So that way we have no duplicates. We don't have to worry about sifting through a large number of duplicate assets. So we only just really have the one version of everything there. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sort these out, get them into a collection for you, and then I will pass that out. It'll show up on your homepage on Slate as an announcement, so that you will get a notification that these things have been made live and that they're available for you. Like I said, I'm going to do that as I grade, kind of start putting them aside. And what I'll do is I'm going to go through them and try and orient them the right way as well, so that anything you take from that folder will be correct. And then that's it. This is going to be the first step in getting this whole system built. What we're going to do next week is do the scripting portion of this. So we're going to go in and set up that we're going to make some very temporary buttons for now, and we're going to make sure that everything works the way that it's supposed to work. Now, the one or two other things that we should probably do this week is the flow map. So if I go and let's go look for, I'm going to open a browser and I'm going to do a search for flow map online free. And we'll go, here's a flowchart maker. It doesn't really matter which of these things you use, but the idea is to go and create a flowchart, something like these guys here, that is going to allow you to, again, block out how you plan on doing this. Okay, so the first node is going to be when the player hits start. So level entry is what goes here. Then you're going to have, does the player, these are questions here when you use these ones. So does the player want to use a pistol? If the answer is yes, then, set camera to pistol. Does the player want to use a paint job? Yes or no? Does the player want a muzzle attachment? Yes or no? You got to go through all of the options there. If the answer was no to the player wants a pistol, then we're going to go down, does the player want an SMG? And then you're going to have the same, yes, they want an SMG. Okay, do they want to paint it? Do they want the attachments? Which attachments do they want? And go through that. The answer is no. We're going to go down to another one. Do they want a rifle? If the answer is no, this has to go back up and into this one again. And so this is the idea. You've got to go and set up all of these things. You can put camera animation in here if you want, but I want your entire system planned out here so that nothing is going to be a surprise to you. The other thing that we can do this week in preparation for getting everything going is the planning of our level. So doing a little bit of a block out. So here's what I have in mind for the design of my weapon customization map. This is the one that I'm going to be doing as a demo. So again, you are able to follow me through this if you so choose. The system that I'm going to be creating is going to be essentially, I'm going to go and sketch this out here for you. That's why I've looked at the underside of my platform. But essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a room. And that room, something like this, that room is going to have a box in it over here. Okay, so something like this. There will be a box over on this wall, something like that. And there'll be a box over here on this wall. The idea is that each one of these boxes is going to be some kind of storage box for my weapons. The weapon is going to be in the box somewhere in here. That'll be one of each of my three weapons. When you're at weapon A, we'll call this A, this is B, and this is C. When you're at weapon A, there's going to be a mark here on the floor, or just a point, not something that is visible. And the camera is going to align itself to that. So the camera will be hereabouts. The weapon will lift up from the box and will float here as the player then gets on-screen UI that allows them to make changes to that piece. If the player then chooses that they don't want to work on weapon A, the camera will animate over to box B, where its weapon will then lift up and float above, again giving us the same kind of option menu on the side. If they don't like that one, the camera can then rotate to this one. Same deal. This weapon will show up here with, again, menu systems that we can do over here. Finally, this will then have the ability to move over here. So that's how I'm going to shuffle between my systems. I'm also planning on having the box, the point, the weapon, and its floating position, and it's in the box position. I plan on having all of those part of the same blueprint. And the UI as well. We're going to put the menu in here too. The reason for that is that this allows me to make my system scalable. So if I don't want to add a 3 weapons, but I want to add a 4th one, well, cool. I can put another box over here. It will automatically get its camera point. It'll automatically get the floating position of the weapon. And as I choose what asset goes in the box, it'll just naturally appear there. Same thing with one here, one here, one here. I can put as many as I want, and they'll just automatically all get their little spots where the camera will know where to go. Easy peasy. I'm only going to build the system with 3, but the idea is that that 3 will be scalable so that I can actually do more than 3. That's my plan. The room itself, I plan on just being cinder block walls. So I'm going to do some kind of really simplistic pattern in here. Okay, that's what I'm envisioning everywhere. I'm going to do a fluorescent light in the ceiling. So some tubes up here, maybe 4 tubes or something like that. I'm probably going to have to put a door on one of the walls in order to make it look a little bit more believable. And there's going to have to be a wall back here as well towards us that we can't see at the moment. And that's all I want to do. I'm going to do kind of a dirty, chunky concrete floor. And you know, nothing really fancy. I just want to have it kind of work like that. Again, your design, what you do with your map is completely up to you. Now, in terms of blocking this in, well, cool. I've got my floor here. I'm going to go and double it in size. I'm going to go scale this. I'm going to go just set this to 2. Yeah, that'll work. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just, let's see, hold Alt, and we'll make a clone of this at 90 degrees. And I'll go bring this guy back and put it there. I'll hold Alt, and I'll bring one of these guys over here. So I'm just doing a very quick block in of what I want this thing to look like. So Alt and rotate 90. And move my camera up. And we'll move this sucker back until it fits. I want to make sure that I'm not leaving a gap there. And again, I'm not going to use these walls. This is not what I'm doing. I'm just blocking in the environment, right? I just want to get a kind of temporary version of this thing built that allows me to grow. It allows me to build upon it. So that thing there, and then I'll grab the floor and I'll hold Alt and I'll drag a floor up to the ceiling, which I guess makes it not a floor any further. Now, since I've got an enclosed box here, I can probably get rid of the atmospheric fog, the light source, the sky sphere, the sky light. I'll keep the reflection after. And I'm going to go inside the box where we can go into lights, and I can put a point light in here. This is going to be a movable light. I'll drag it up here and go rebuild my lighting. And I've kind of now got a very temporary build of the building, the thing that I'm going to be moving around in. So this will give me a good idea in terms of camera angles, you know, where I'm going to see things. I can see that light, as is, not going to be enough. I can also start going in with a post-process volume like we did in our lighting course last semester. And I can start adding some values to this. So I'm going to go unbound. We'll turn off the eye adaptation so that this just remains a single color. We'll take this light and we'll increase its output here. I'm going to brighten this up a little bit. And there, I'm starting to see the room in which my map will take place. And so this is kind of what I want to do for my block in. I'm just going to move this below here because I don't need to see it. And so cool, I can kind of see, you know, my camera is going to be over here looking at something, and then it'll swing over here and look at something, and then it'll swing over here and look at something. I can kind of see how that system is going to play out. I can also even test it for scale. You know, if I go into my meshes and I just bring the pistol in, I can see how big the pistol actually is, which is only that big. So I've actually got a really nice big room here. Right, if I go bring this guy back in terms of where the camera needs to be, right? Again, when I'm customizing this thing, I'm going to want it to be nice and up close here like this, with maybe a menu on either side. So I can actually see how much of that wall I'm going to see behind it and stuff. And so this is a little bit of my block out, kind of planning where things are going to go. I might even want to throw in, you know, where my boxes are going to go. I go in here and I type in box. No, I want cube. And I can go bring a cube in. So here's the cube that one weapon's going to sit on. And I'll hold Alt and put another one over here. And then same thing, I'll put Alt. And I'll move one over here. And while these are the weapons that I customize, you know, maybe I'm going to put, maybe I'll put a table in the middle that has some other things or whatnot. Maybe I'm going to put a window in here. I don't know. This is right now, this is where my brain is at, is I'm just blocking in what I'm going to see. So 3 boxes where the camera's going to rotate in between them. I'm going to have to put a door somewhere here so it looks like this is actually a proper thing. Maybe I want to style this to make it look like a rentable locker, you know, one of those storage lockers that you rent. And, you know, you're moving around from cardboard box to cardboard box. I haven't really decided yet. I like the concrete idea. I think that's where I'm going to go with this. And so anyway, now that I've got this chunk of work done, we'll hit save all. And this will save everything that we've got. And then I can start bringing stuff in here as I'm ready. Now, before anybody panics about what you need to be able to do here with your environment, remember that you're allowed to use Marketplace or store assets. I don't care about the environment. The only thing I care about is the weapons in your system. And so that's the stuff that I want you to create from scratch. So we're going to do that. And then that's it. So next week, we'll jump in and do the scripting, and we'll continue the system from there.